franktalks.com.
Relationships, sex, passion. With Dr. Laurie Betito. Hear the show live weeknights 10 to 11 on CJAD 800.
Welcome to Passion, a show about love, sex, and relationships. Tonight, our regular monthly feature that we call Dating Dilemmas. I'm joined by Frank Kermit, dating coach of franktalks.com. He's a best-selling author of several books on the subject of dating. He's the relationship columnist for the West End Times. So if you are single and you have questions about dating and meeting people, how to be successful, how to understand the genders, how to pick up, how to seduce, whatever it is, you give us a call here tonight at 514-790-0991, Star Talk, star 8255 on your cell. If you're calling long distance, it's 1-800-491-CJD, or you can text your message or your question at 514-800. And we usually pick a topic, a theme, to go with our dating dilemmas. And the dilemma of the night is going to be about who is off limits to date. Hey, Frank, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dr. Laurie. Always a pleasure.
It's always a pleasure to have you. So when we talk about off limits dating, what do we mean when we say off limits?
There's two definitions for off limits dating. The first definition is it's somebody that you can't date right now, but if circumstances were to change, you could date them at a later time. For example, someone you like, but that person happens to be in a relationship already. You basically decide, I'm not going to break up that relationship or make my move now, but when that person becomes available, that's when I'll make my move.
So one is an unavailable person.
That's right.
Which would be off limits because they are just unavailable, but it can get a lot more complicated than that.
That's right. A second example of that first category, someone you work with, if you decide that you don't want to get involved with somebody who's a coworker, and when that person is no longer a coworker, they're now removed from the off-limits list.
So I'd like to ask our listeners, who is off-limits to you? Could it be a boss? Could it be the ex of a friend of yours? Would you ever date your best friend's ex-husband, for example, is one I can think of. Would you date a distant relative? Look, we know cousins who, date and marry each other as well. So who would be off limits to you? I would love to know if you've ever refused to date someone that you like because for some reason, maybe because of your family or your job or your friends, you just deemed them to be completely off limits. 514-790-0991. So what are the complications here? What do you usually see with the issues that people have with people who are off limits?
Basically, it's a question of consequences. If I date that person, there may be consequences I don't control that might be too high a price to pay so that I don't want to even take a chance on it. Let's say you are in a class and you really find your teacher very attractive, and there's a chance for you and your teacher to start a relationship or just start dating for that matter. Do you wait until that person is no longer your teacher? Do you wait until you graduate the whole program?
Sometimes there are rules, though. There are teachers are bound by ethics, and I'm thinking of, we recently got an email. I got an email from a guy who was saying that he's in love with his therapist and wanted help into how to seduce her or how to, get her to date him. Now, in my books, that is way off limits. And just ethically speaking, any client, first of all, from the therapist point of view, any client is off limits right away. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. It's not an option. It is not an option.
With that said, despite the fact that there are rules, people still develop feelings, and sometimes they have to figure out, look, is it worth the risk? Because, in a perfect world, in an ideal world, if people really connect and build a future, well, they may have started in a situation that wasn't too keen, but some people are still willing to take the risk.
Maybe call me rigid, but in certain situations, it's not about too keen. It really is about unethical and uneven and unfair.
And there's another question. At what point, how much time has to pass before that situation is no longer uneven or unfair?
You want to know my position on that? In that situation, I have in my mind, once a patient, always a patient. There is no time limit for me.
I remember
that's the way it works.
I remember reading for the guidelines of marriage and family therapists. Wasn't there something in there, something like 2 years? If the person's no longer a client for 2 years, it's just not something you do. Like you have to.
I
wait
think that
until
it all, again, it's murky. Yeah, certainly, when somebody is your client, there's no way, right? But there's a different thoughts on that, because if you think about it, the reason it's off limits is because it's an unbalanced relationship. Because let's say the therapist or the person in a position of I don't want to say authority, but there's a power dynamic that's different. It's a one-way. A whole bunch of information about the other person, intimate details about them. They don't know anything about you, and so you have an insight into all their vulnerabilities. It's an uneven relationship, and you know as well as I do. In a regular relationship, you build on that, you earn that, right? The development of intimacy and being vulnerable. So you don't have that. That's taken away. Even if it's 2 years down the line or 3 years down the line, there's an advantage that one person has over the other.
Going into another direction here, sometimes we're dealing with situations where I've heard stories of police officers giving a speeding ticket to someone, and in that process, they slip the person the phone number and say, you know what, you're pretty neat, I'd love to take you out, and they end up starting to date. So, again, in that context, is that off limits, or are you just meeting somebody in the course of your duties, and if you meet somebody through the course of your work, it's a way to meet someone?
I guess it's only off limits if it says so in your code of ethics.
Wow.
So if you're a professional and by virtue of being licensed in that profession, if you have to live by a code of ethics and your code of ethics says this is something you don't do, then you don't do it. It's like the law of the profession, right?
Okay,
a code of ethics, right? It's regulations, and it's part of our laws, So
in fact,
so it's different. If that doesn't exist, then it doesn't exist. It's fine.
Exactly. Actually, there are a number of corporations now that are working policies saying that if coworkers start to date, even if they're coworkers for the same corporation but in completely different departments, they have to let HR know that they're dating.
Really?
Yeah. I was working for a company many years ago, and the gentleman that I was talking with says that him and his then wife, when they started dating, they were both employees of the same corporation. When they started to date, they had to go to HR and say, by the way, just have it on record that we're dating. Because too many times a relationship would go south.
Well,
and then something happens, and then somebody accuses somebody of something, and, well, we didn't even know you were dating. Why didn't you announce it? Well, we wanted to keep it private. So they just created the policy. And if they find out that you are dating and that you didn't tell HR, you both could lose your job.
Really? Wow. Somebody texted in, I got involved with a woman who was separated for 8 months and didn't get divorced for 3 years. Never again. Be available fully or stay single.
That's a really great example of off limits. Don't date somebody who is only separated but not fully divorced. And look, to each his own. We all have to decide where our own boundaries and where we draw the line. Here's a perfect example. He learned from his mistake. He learned from experience that that's not something he wants to do again.
Right, because there are potential risks, and here you go. Staying. I mean, the person is really not that available if you. For different reasons.
Well, if somebody's separated, are they separated because it's a trial divorce, or are they separated as a means to try and reconcile the marriage?
Right. And how much attached are they to the ex too? And how much are you the third, kind of person in this wheel? Who would you not date? Who is off limits to you, or who would be off limits to you? Have you ever dated somebody with consequences to it that you said, you know what, the hell with it? I know it's off limits, but I'm doing it anyway because my feelings are taking over. Would love to hear your stories at 514-800 if you want to text them in, or you can call us at 514-790-0991. You're listening to Dating Dilemmas here on Passion on CJAD.
You're listening to Passion with Dr. Laurie Betito on CJAD 800.
Dating dilemmas tonight on the program. Frank Kermit in studio with us. He's a dating coach, a best-selling author and educator, and the relationship columnist for the West End Times newspaper. We're talking about who is off limits to you. Off limits dating. Got a bunch of text messages here. Anyone who needs medication to function daily would be off limits to them.
For some people, that's actually a very good question to ask.
Yeah, and it's it's almost like, what are my non-negotiables? In many ways. Hi, why should we inform HR we are dating? Someone wants to know.
If the company you work for has implemented a policy that you have to let HR know that you're dating, it's to prevent any potential accusations after the fact.
Of sexual harassment and stuff.
Sexual harassment, and so-and-so was tried to hold my hand during work hours. Well, we were dating at the time. No, we weren't.
Right.
But
you only have to tell HR if there is company policy.
Yes, if the company itself has no policies regarding this matter, then there's nothing to report.
Right, exactly.
It's one example of a company going above and beyond to try and prevent situations from occurring.
Right. Here, text. My mom doesn't want me being with my 5-year boyfriend because of his past, but I'm still with him and always will be. So I guess sometimes the consequences are our parents, like what your parents think or what your...
Look, it's very possible that your parents may disown you if you go out with somebody that they don't approve of. Maybe your parents are worried for your future if you're getting involved with somebody who does have a past that could limit you in ways that right now you may take for granted or not be aware of.
That's true.
If you get involved with someone who, let's say, has a criminal past, and you have a passion for traveling, well, somebody with a criminal record may not be able to travel.
Right.
So these are things that you have to be mindful of when you're dating and deciding whether or not you should be getting serious. And I know this sounds so unfair. I know this sounds like, well, you're judging people and you have to give people a chance. And if you do form a connection and you're willing to deal with the consequences, you go for it. But if you're not prepared to deal with the consequences, don't kid yourself.
But also be aware of the consequences, because sometimes we put our heads in the sand and we don't think of the consequences until they creep up. But sometimes we do need to think ahead.
That's right.
So that's really important. When I was in my early 20s, I refused to date anyone with kids. Now, in my 40s, of course, it's a different ballgame, but the thought of exes always being in the picture is daunting and can be complicated. That's another good point.
Sure. If you are really, 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 really close friends with an ex, that might not necessarily be great for any potential future partner coming in. And if someone wants to be important to you and the two of you want to build a future together, I firmly believe that if somebody says, look, I don't feel comfortable with you being friends with someone that you used to be involved with, you have to respect those feelings.
Right. But sometimes in your 40s, you're getting involved with somebody who's divorced and somebody who's in a hell of a mess. A big financial, emotional mess, because it is an awful divorce. Like, some divorces are awful, just awful. And to walk in there as the next person who's dating and to be subjected to
a crazy ex,
or a crazy situation, or
I get people coming to me all the time for this. I want to go out with this person, but this person has a crazy ex, and I don't want that person's spur of the moment decisions to affect my partner in ways that's going to affect me. Such as, I've decided that I'm going to move across the country and take the kids with me. Well, my partner is going to want to go, and that means what? That I'm going to have to pick up and uproot because his crazy ex or her crazy ex has decided to do something,
Mm-hmm.
And yes, it is. That's the consequence of entering into into dating somebody of that nature. So be mindful.
Again, consequences. Really, we're talking about off-limits dating, but everybody has their own idea of who is off limits to them.
One of the comments that was brought up, I now am open to dating people that have children. Well, guess what? What happens if one of those kids, never mind the ex, but one of those kids has got a major problem? So now you're dating a single parent who's got problem kids. And what do you do when that problem kid is a young adult or a teenager with a severe drug problem? And that's what you're stepping into. You're not stepping into someone.
You step into a package. You don't step into you're not just with one person. You're
with
with
the whole
everything
thing.
that they come with as well, especially as you get older. So that's all part of it. And so, which makes some people, off limits. I know people who won't date divorced individuals, or who won't date widowed, or who for their own reasons, whatever they have decided the potential consequences will be. Another texter says, I had a real crush on my psychologist. I had to chalk it up to the vast amount of help she gave me. Hard to reject my affection. I think she was struggling with it too, but thankfully professionalism ruled. So grateful for her, though. And that's exactly it. That's a very good point that you make. It's true. You do have to chalk it up to the vast amount of not just the help she gave you, but the intimacy you developed. When you share and share and share with somebody, you do develop feelings. It's natural, it's normal, it's nothing to be ashamed of, but it's something to be dealt with. And sometimes it could happen that a psychologist or the person helping you, has feeling, in other words, cares more than, I don't want to say they should be caring all the time, but where they too might be struggling with their own feelings, but they work them through. As professionals, we're taught to work through those feelings and, yes, let professionalism prevail.
Let's also remember, and let's be fair to everybody here, regardless of what your job is, regardless of what position that you take on, you're human. And sometimes you meet somebody and the chemistry is just there. You just feel that connection.
You can, of course, but acting on it is a different story. And that's where the choices that we make are based on, we're not all just a bunch of chemistry. We make conscious decisions and choices as well. Dating dilemmas here on Passion. We're talking about who is off limits to you, and have you ever dated someone who was really off limits and it caused you some problems? We'd love to hear from you tonight on Passion on CJD 800.
You're listening to Passion with Dr. Laurie Betito on CJAD 800.
Tonight on Passion, it is dating dilemmas. We usually, believe we do it on Wednesday nights, but we do it whenever we can get the chance to do it. So Frank Kermit, who is always gracious enough to come into studio whenever we need him, is here with us. He's a dating coach, a best-selling author and educator, and the relationship columnist for the West End Times. And we're talking about who is off limits to you. Are married people off limits to you? And I think we need to have a big discussion about this. I had an argument with somebody. I can't even remember what the actual argument was, but it was more about whose fault is it if you've got a single person dating a married person, and is she, let's say it's a she, is she the one to blame, for the breakup of the marriage, or is it the one who's done the cheating? And we were having the argument that the one who is single and going out with this married guy has no guilt, doesn't feel badly, doesn't, is going on her merry way without any thought to his situation or his wife or his family or whatever. To me, clearly there's to me, that's an off limits, but for some people it may not be off limits. Let's go to our phone lines and speak to James. Hi, James. Hi, James.
Hi. It's
Hi.
Me.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good.
Good. Your
you
thoughts?
asked me to listen to your program. I listened to it. I missed it for the past 2 weeks or something, but whatever. But, I absolutely, it's really good to talk with you.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I'd like to say for your what was Mr. Kermit?
Kermit, yeah, Frank.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with him also. And, don't give him a hard time, because I think what he's saying is, pretty much true, too. What you have to do, it doesn't matter really if it's professional or this and that, because, I'm the one that, I'm the person that is with, has an interest in their therapist. And he says,
okay.
Yeah?
Okay, go ahead.
And he says, it's just human nature. And it doesn't matter.
But it's what you do about it. It does matter. You're wrong. It does matter. It will matter very much to the therapist too.
Yes, I respect that, but I think that he's also right when he says, like, it's kind of like you can fall in love with a doctor or a police officer and do wrong, and it's just things happen, you know?
Yes, I'm not saying that feelings don't develop, James, but there's a big but, and we can continue to discuss that. Thanks so much for calling in. Appreciate your call. More on the other side of the news here on Passion on CJAD.
You're listening to Passion with Dr. Laurie Betito on CJAD 800.
Dating Dilemmas on the program. It's Frank Kermit in studio with us. Once a month he joins us and we talk about one dating dilemma, basically. And I would love to get your input as well. I've had a few text messages. Interesting. Who is off limits to you? And interesting that we've been talking about, a professional being off limits to you. Mostly a psychologist or a psychiatrist would be more off limits than, say, a doctor treating you for something else, just because of the nature of the work. As one texter put it, it's the vast amount of help and intimacy and information and all of that you share with somebody, which you don't really do with a doctor that you might see for 5 minutes,
Maybe not, but even in those cases, I really look at it as it's the risk involved. Can the person lose their job?
Yes.
And in the case of a psychologist,
you lose your license.
You could lose your license.
Yes.
But in unregulated industries or in industries where that's not covered, there may not be that kind of risk. There might be other kinds of risks.
Right.
And the risks to a reputation, obviously, is something to consider. But for some people, the idea that I don't connect with that many people, and even in the helping professions, there's always that question of, if these people met outside of that, would they still have the chemistry and connection that they're feeling?
That's a good question.
So let's be fair here, and this is what I'm saying. I'm not saying that the psychiatrist or the psychologist should cross that line, but I am saying that the chemistry that exists between the two of them may be a very legitimate chemistry that would have existed if they had met in any other fashion.
Yes, I'm not disagreeing with you, but you can't do anything about it, is what I'm saying. If you've got a relationship established, a therapeutic relationship, you cannot do anything about it. The risk of losing your license it's unethical. Like the reason we have that in place is that code in place is because it does great harm to the client.
And speaking of ethics, we can talk about people dating married individuals.
Let's talk about that for a minute, because I have talked to people who let's say they'll blame the single person for dating a married individual, and I don't really agree with that. The single person doesn't have, their risk is minimal compared to the risk that the married person has dating somebody else. Or having the affair.
With that said, if I'm dealing with somebody who only dates married people, and I have met men and women who make it a policy, they'll only date, whether they say it just happens or whether they actively choose it, they will only date people who are emotionally unavailable or people who are attached.
Yeah, well, that's because they have issues. Because they have issues of attachment and issues of commitment and maybe other issues.
Or they're only attracted to people that they can't really have. Because anytime those married people become emotionally available, I just don't feel it for you anymore. I just don't know why.
Right.
So the question is, who's to blame? Everybody's responsible for their own actions. It starts with that. So whether you're the married person who's knowingly cheating, or whether you are the other individual, the person on the side, everybody's responsible for their own actions. And you can blame the other person all you want. In the end, you have to take responsibility for what you did.
Yes, you have to, and it comes back to what we were talking before the break, which is you still have a choice as to what to do about it. Fine, you can have chemistry with anybody. You can have chemistry with anybody on earth. But it's not just chemistry. Your head has to prevail. You have to think things through. It isn't just about what's in your heart. you also have to intellectualize and think about your actions.
And whether or not the consequences are worth it.
And that's right. You have to think about those consequences as well.
Well, I know a few individuals who they make it a point not to date outside of, let's say, their religion
Yeah,
or
I
their
know
culture.
people like that too, yes.
And if they do, they run the risk of losing their friends, being ostracized by their community, being disowned by their families. And is it worth the risk? Well, only you know if you can handle it or not. Just a word of caution to everybody who's in this situation. It's a lot harder than you think to make it alone long term. Even if you have the most solid relationship, you get alienated by everybody you've ever loved. It makes it really, really difficult when there's nobody for you to reach out to. Even if you have a great relationship, when you start having kids, when you start having a future, and there's nobody to reach out to, even, let's say, during the holidays.
Right.
It can be the isolation can be overwhelming.
Right. So, and you have to think that through, although it's very hard to think that far ahead sometimes, you know?
Right.
We think love prevails.
It doesn't.
You know, if we love each other, everything will be fine. And that
Well,
doesn't work that way.
Listen, love is great, and it's a good start.
not
It's a
enough.
great motivation, but love without work ain't going to make nothing happen.
Well, there's no such thing. You can't. No relationship will stay without work, for sure not. So, what are other off limits that you've seen that are really would be big no-nos? We've talked about married people. We've talked about bosses.
I recently got a phone call from a guy who says he wants to date the ex-girlfriend of one of his good buddies, and this is from 2 years ago. And he's like, should I talk to the guy first before I reach out to her? And
Well, there's a very good question. I like that question. What if your best friend or your close friend is no longer dating or no longer married to somebody who you think is hot or who you have an attraction to? Can you pursue them? How do you go about doing that?
Well, I can tell you what my philosophy is, and then we have to ask the question of how important is the friendship. My first philosophy is when two people break up, they both become free to seek out a soulmate no matter who that other person is. It's not your business. When you break it off with somebody, it is not your business who they hook up with. And if they hook up with somebody that you think is a great person and a great friend, you should be happy for them. Okay? Now, with that said, you want to date the ex of a friend of yours, you got to know that if you start dating that ex, even if that person has no interest in rekindling with that ex,
Yeah, and mostly they don't.
some people are still very possessive. You want my ex because that's my property over there. I can't believe you want my ex. You know what? It's not your ex in the sense of you own that person. You walked away from that person and your friend have every right to meet up. And if they find love and they're happy, go for it. With that said, if you feel that your friend is going to have a problem with it, talk to him about it.
Okay,
And
so
then-
that would be the thing to do.
Well, actually, no.
No?
My attitude is, look, to heck with your friend. If you have a chance to build a future with somebody, that's more important than a friendship that may not last another 5 or 10 years based on circumstances. In 10 years
So
from now,
isn't the right ethical kind of thing to do is to say, hey, I'm interested in your ex. I hope you're okay with it. And
why do you need that person's permission?
It's not permission. It's just, I don't know.
You need that person's
it's
permission?
courtesy? No, I don't know.
For what? For what?
It's your friend.
And if you're talking about a
I
best...
wouldn't want to do it behind their back.
Well, what if
and
it's a
them
one-night
finding
stand?
out.
What if it's a one-night stand? Do you have to go and ask permission for a one-night stand?
It's not that you're asking permission. It's that you are not keeping any secrets. If it's I would think the consequence would be that if that person, my friend, finds out from somebody else that I did this and I never shared that with them, well, that's certainly going to ruin the friendship for sure.
If it's a strong enough friendship, that person would be happy that their ex has actually hooked up with their friend. And I know that sounds like so crazy, but the bottom line is that person's ex is going to move on and meet with a number of people. If my exes and my friends end up getting together and become I'm actually good with it. My attitude is, if I choose somebody as a friend, it means that's a good person. If I went out with somebody, even though it didn't work out, I would still think of my ex as a good person. And if two good people get together, wonderful, great, wonderful. I may not be a part of their lives, but that's okay. I don't have to be.
Right.
It's when you start thinking, now, wait a minute, you're not allowed to date anybody I've ever been intimate.
Yeah, no,
Come on.
that's a bit immature, I think.
that's for me is an unreasonable expectation. This
It's very
illusion of
high
control.
school. That's how people are in high school. That's very high school. Yeah, that doesn't work.
And when it comes to people's sexual pasts, well, I don't need to know every one night stand of my exes or my friends. And if they have happened to hook up, it's not my business. The same way that my future with whoever I hook up with is not my business. I once made a promise. I will not go out with that particular friend's ex because he asked me to. He said, Frank, I know the two of you are friends. Please don't ever go out with her. And you know what? I regretted it.
Really?
I regret it because her and I continue to be really great friends. And one day she leaned in to kiss me and I didn't take it.
Mm-hmm. Because you had made that promise.
Because
to
I
your
made
friend.
that promise. I kept that promise. And you know what? It taught me a lesson. And since then, I have never made that promise to anybody else ever again. My attitude is I could have had a wonderful connection with her. We had a solid friendship. It was a perfect basis for a relationship if I had decided to pursue it. And I did not.
That's a good point. 514-790-0991. Star Talk, star 8255 on your cell. You can also text us at 514-800. We're talking about who is off limits to date. Who would be off limits to you? Would it be the ex of a friend of yours, your best friend's ex-wife, for example? Would you ever consider dating them? Would they be off limits? Of course, having an affair with that's a different situation altogether. But let's just say everybody's free and single, because there is a difference between talking about who's off limits because they're not free and who's off limits by virtue of the relationship you have with other people in your life or the consequences that it might cause. So I'd love to hear from people who have had consequences, who have made choices about who they date, and who have had to suffer certain consequences, whether it's family, friends, job, etc. Give us a call here on CJAD 800.
You're listening to Passion with Dr. Laurie Betito on CJAD 800.
Dating dilemmas tonight on the program. Frank Kermit joins us of franktalks.com. We're talking about who is off limits to you. Who wouldn't you date because of particular consequences or unavailability or what have you? We've been talking about, the ex of a friend or maybe a distant relative or a boss, or who is it that you would not date? A married person, for example, and that's not for everybody. Some people would date married people, and plenty of people would choose not to, would say, no, that would be totally off limits. So we'd love to hear your thoughts at 514-790-0991, or you can text at 514-800. Ryan joins us on the program. Hi, Ryan.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
I'm happy to be on your show to discuss my experience.
I'm happy to have you on the show.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Pardon?
Go ahead.
Yeah. I had a woman date me about much older than me, and she kind of studied me through my past. Like wherever I hung out, she would listen in and say, "Oh, he likes older women. That's me." Into like I'm a psychic, so she followed me to a spiritualist church, and then just told me what I want to hear. So what I'm sharing is that I think it's sad that some people are almost like a fraud identity. Like they come out, oh, we have so much in common, and they try to pretend like they're compatible when they're not.
So, in other words, she used the information she gathered from you to say, look
Yeah,
how
from
similar,
my past, where I
right?
hung
Look how
out, yeah, and
similar
then
we
said,
are.
oh, I believe, and look at us, we're the same religion, and I believe in angels and mediumship and blah blah blah. And then she used that as a weapon to stick to me like glue.
Well, it's manipulation, right? And you're right. Sometimes we can be manipulated, and I think Frank could probably help in that department as to how to spot that. But you're right. Lots of people get kind of duped that way. Ryan, thanks so much for calling in.
Okay, thank you very
All right.
much.
Have a great night. What do you think of that? I do think we see that. I'm sure you see that in the dating world.
Look, you can't be held responsible if someone lies to you. What you are held responsible for is what you do when you find out. So when someone says, we were dating and that's when I found out that that person was married. Okay, what did you do as soon as you found out the truth? Well, I was already involved with the person by then. Well, no, that's not good enough.
That's not a good enough. Right. You're not really taking responsibility.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about some of the other things for off limits. We had discussed this on one of our other programs. For some people, a person's sexual history might make them off limits.
Mm-hmm. Right. Somebody who may have had too many partners, for example.
Exactly. And so there are
I've
some
seen
people who say, well, dating you is off limits because you've been with so many sexual partners, and I make a judgment call on how many is too many.
Right. I've actually seen that come up to bite somebody after where they made a decision to marry, and then it kept coming back up. The person kept throwing it back in that person's face every time there was an argument or a fight, and it basically destroyed a marriage because the person couldn't get over it.
Yep.
They couldn't. They said they got past it, but they actually never did get past that, and they didn't accept it. So, again, that might go with what Ryan was saying in terms of manipulating a situation a little bit, making the other person believe that they're okay with all of this, they're compatible with all of this, when in fact they're really not.
Other things that have come up: would you date someone who's in an open relationship?
Mm-hmm.
Meaning they're in an open relationship, they have another partner who is their primary partner, or seeing other people, and are you okay with that? Well, maybe you're not. Maybe your rule is, I don't want to date
That's
someone in
right.
an open relationship. I'll only want to date someone who's available, aiming towards monogamy. So that's also another possibility.
Unfortunately, sometimes in a situation, you're not told a lot of this information. So you may end up going into a relationship with someone who you only later, even after you've been married, let's say, find out that they're really interested in an open relationship, but they've never, and they never brought it up, but suddenly now they are. And you're kind of stuck with like, well, wait a second, I didn't bank on this. This was not what I signed up for. I don't want this.
This is why I often recommend to couples who just got engaged to have what's called a full disclosure. Tell the person that you're engaged to everything you can think of that would make the person say, no, don't want to marry you. No. And test them. Because if they can't handle that conversation, they're certainly not going to be able to handle a marriage.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a good point. Someone else says, I wouldn't date a smoker for obvious health reasons and social reasons and financial reasons. And that's almost one of those, again, non-negotiables, not always off limits in the way that we're talking off limits, but certainly a non-negotiable. So traits that are not just non-negotiable for you. Someone else had brought up, someone who takes meds every day of their life, for example, for whatever reason, that's also maybe a non-negotiable. Someone who has children, non-negotiable.
The smoking one is probably the most common example I use in the coaching.
Oh, yeah?
When I start talking to people and I say, well, look, would you have a one-night stand with someone who smokes? Would you have a friends with benefits with someone who smokes? Working all the way up to the spouse category, would you have a spouse? Just to figure out where somebody's criteria are, where somebody's boundaries are. Another off-limits person, do you date your own ex?
How about we talk about that in a minute? Going back to an ex after, are they automatically off limits? We'll talk about that when we come back with Frank Kermit and Dating Dilemmas here on Passion on CJAD.
You're listening to Passion with Dr. Laurie Betito on CJAD 800.
Dating Dilemmas tonight on the program. Frank Kermit in studio talking about who is off limits to you. I'm 20 with a man who is 51. I really enjoy his company, but I feel shy in public because I know some people may assume I'm a prostitute. I would say, or his daughter.
It's very understandable that you're going to feel like that. However, you have to understand that even if you are with somebody your own age or in your own age group, there are still people who are going to make judgment calls on whether or not you're a proper couple, if you look good together or not.
Yeah, but Frank, truly, like when you see a 30-year difference, you're going to get much more judged than if you're with somebody of the same age.
Yes,
you are going
to get more judged, but it's something that you have to understand that if you were with somebody your own age group but of a different race, of a different religion, there's always going to be somebody that has a problem with it. And
Except you have to accept the consequences. Like,
Yes.
we keep going back to, if you really want to date somebody who is 30 years older than you, you're going to have to accept the consequences. And those
Yes.
consequences might be that, yes, people will judge you. And
Yes.
people will look at you, and people may make comments, and people will think, that you're just with a wealthy guy, or that people,
People are all gonna make
all kinds of assumptions.
yes, you don't control the consequences. You control your choices, but you don't control the consequences. But I would rather encourage somebody to say, hey, if you really believe in what you have there, you can't be afraid of what everybody else is going to think. Even if everybody thinks you're wrong, if you believe you're right and you believe that you have something worth holding on to, then you go for it.
I would personally, I question what does a 20-year-old have in common with a 51-year-old. But again, it's just a question. I always, I throw it out there to say, just ask yourself these questions. They're valid, and
It's a very valid question, but that is the issue. Not everybody else has a problem with it.
Exactly. That's true. Just tuned in and not sure if it was said, but your friend's mom is definitely off limits.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Oh, come on.
Have you seen my friend's mom?
Another one, with age, 41, comes maturity. I wouldn't date someone with an ugly personality or heavy drug user. Race, religion, social class, unimportant to me. Again, everybody has their limits, and what is off limits to them
What's not
is
important,
going to be different.
What's not important for you might be actually very important for
to me.
someone
Yeah,
else.
exactly. And I think that's a good point. Thanks so much, Frank, for this Dating Dilemmas, and we will speak to you again next month for the same thing, and we'll see you on the Boys Club as well. Thanks to Brad Smith in Master Control, and thanks to all of you for participating. Loved all your text messages and your phone calls. It's wonderful when it's interactive like that.
Listen to Passion with Dr. Laurie Betito, live weeknights 10 to 11 on CJAD and CJAD.com.
Need help with love, sex, dating and relationships? Visit franktalks.com.
If you need help with your relationships, my buddy Frank, he's got some tips. Just go to franktalks.com. His advice is better than your mom's. He knows what you're going through, 'cause Frank has been there too. So log on to franktalks.com. franktalks.com.
Need help with love, sex, dating, and relationship issues? Help from Frank Kermit, the best-selling author and Canada's most international relationship coach, is only a click away at franktalks.com. Coaching available in person, by phone, and by Skype. For singles, couples, and alternative lifestyles, franktalks.com.